Okay, great. All right. So, hi everyone. My name is Nikita, and this is day two of our virtual summit. We're so excited to have our policy director, Anya Ujjwal from Texas, start us off with a panel on model minority myth and how we can dismantle that same myth with legislative policy advocacy. I love for Anya to talk a little bit about what she's going to go over today, and then we can get into the slides.
Okay, there's actually a table of contents and introduction built into the slideshow, so let me just share that if I can find it. Okay,
Perfect.
can you see it?
Give it a second to load.
Okay, it's saying my screen sharing's paused.
You might want
I'm
to
just gonna,
try it again.
yeah.
Hmm. Oh,
Okay,
yes. Okay, that worked.
cool. Okay, so my presentation is about the model minority myth, which is about this, and it's specifically about dismantling harmful narratives like the model minority myth through legislative policy. Okay, so first, the table of contents. First, I'm going to introduce the topic, and then we'll discuss it. Next, we'll talk about the impact of legislation, then current legislation that is relevant to the model minority myth, things like cases, bills, etc. Then we're going to do a workshop where you draft a bill, and then we're going to talk about the impact of legislation. Okay, first, what is the model minority myth? So the model minority myth is a racial stereotype that characterizes AANHPI individuals as naturally intelligent, successful, obedient, hardworking, etc., especially in academics and in careers. So it kind of suggests that AANHPI communities, through discipline and cultural values, have managed to achieve the American dream without any complaints, struggles, or and without any need for structural support. Which on the surface, might seem like a good thing. Okay, yay, we're doing good. But it actually frames Asian Americans as high achievers, those who outperform others in school, do really good in college, and are really good economically. But beneath the praise that is inherent in that claim, there's an implicit narrative that is not only false, but incredibly harmful. And it reinforces the idea that our communities don't need help, don't experience racism, and shouldn't speak out or protest. It kind of makes us seem docile, apolitical, passive. And in doing so, it kind of erases our diversity, struggles, and political agency. So first, let's talk about the origin of this myth. It didn't arise organically, like it didn't just happen. It was manufactured, especially during the civil rights movement of the 1960s. So during this time, the media was praising Asian Americans, especially Japanese and Chinese, as model minorities. So Black Americans were organizing and demanding justice. But the media began highlighting the success stories of Japanese and Chinese Americans. Headlines like success stories, or for example, one pretty important one that a lot of people know about was called The Triumph of the Quiet Asian. And these appeared in major publications and framed Asian Americans as proof that minorities, such as like all of these minorities, could succeed in America through hard work and silence. So the implication was just that, if Asian Americans could overcome discrimination quietly, other racial groups, especially Black Americans, were to blame for their own oppression. So the myth kind of became a tool of white supremacy to kind of be like, wait, if they can do it, so can you. And it was weaponized to shame Black and brown communities, to push assimilation over resistance, and to kind of uphold the idea that systemic racism wasn't the problem, behavior was. Oh, where did it go? No. Okay. So the impacts of this first is erasure, pressure, divide, and conquer politics, which all of these prevent interracial solidarity and create a racial hierarchy. So, for example, Southeast Asian, Pacific Islander, and refugee communities, um, they often face poverty, limited access to healthcare, low graduation rates, and trauma and displacement from war. So because of the myth, these struggles are overlooked in research, and a lot of the Asian communities are automatically grouped together. Also, one important thing I wanted to highlight is in when racism is worded as Black versus white, Asians are automatically grouped with the white or successful, something that we saw a lot when the colleges were revoking the race-based admissions policies. So are you getting a little bit of deja vu from this? Let's share what we've gone through. So if you've experienced anything similar, if you could unmute and share.
You can call on people if you want.
Oh, okay. Ankita, you first.
I love being put on the spot. Okay, so like as a kid, my parents were very like focused on me getting into like the gifted programs and whatnot. There was this like really huge focus on me, uh, like getting good grades and stuff. Like obviously, I still feel it. And then also, I was talking to like a couple of my friends who are like from the like Black American community, and I was talking about how like my school has like a high Asian population, and they were like telling me, "Oh, your test scores must be so high," and I was like, "What? How is that related?" But apparently in their head it was. So that's another like view of the model minority myth that even like Black and Latino Americans see Asians as the successful minority.
Yeah. Would anyone else like to share? If not, that's like fine. I know it's like a sensitive topic for some people.
Yes,
Yeah,
I
for sure.
can.
Oh,
Oh,
sorry. You can go first,
wait,
All
Jenya.
Jenya
you,
first, yeah.
all you. Oh, okay.
Okay.
Um, I was going to namely mention the Black Lives Matter movement and the Stop Asian Hate movement. And they were coinciding in like about 2020, 2021. And I saw a lot of each movement not really embracing the models of intersectionality that were set by civil rights leaders in the 1960s and acting like they were opposing movements and as if our struggles weren't interconnected. And I think that demonization of each side does arise from the model minority myth and that like inherent belief that has been constructed and cultivated in us by propaganda that certain minorities are better than other minorities are and are more prone to success, to academic achievement, and career advancement. And I think that was one of the main things that comes to my mind about the model minority myth.
Okay, yeah. That was also something like we're gonna talk about that in later slides as well. Ishan, you like raise your hand?
Yeah, sure. So, what I want to talk about is in athletics. I've played a bunch of sports, and model minority myth is something definitely that you can see in athletics. Particularly, for example, I played JV soccer my sophomore year, I remember, and being on that team, I remember it was so toxic. I was one of two Asian kids in my suburban North Carolina town, really red district. But, anyways, the point is, it was not an enjoyable experience being on the team. I mean, people would make fun of you for, having to make up a test or doing anything related to academia when you were also equally as interested in a sport that they were interested in. And in this way, not only do we see, Asian Americans being expected to, fulfill this model of minority myth, but we see the opposite that in other areas, for example, sports, we see that people don't expect them to be, all that. And another example is like I remember in my Spanish class last year, I had someone say, "Oh, he's pretty good at tennis for an Indian," and I think that sentence just kind of sums up what this model minority myth really applies to in the athletic context.
That makes a lot of sense. I used to play soccer like when I was young. And I definitely like I think I was too young to like really understand what was going on, but I definitely experienced some of that too. Audit.
Yeah, I think that for me personally, I go to a community that is full of like many Indian and Asian populations. And my school is like 4,000 kids, and like half of them are Asian. So I feel like the model minority myth has kind of created an environment that can be super uncomfortable and pressuring for many of the kids in the area. They constantly feel that they have to like one up each other, that they have to get into the best programs possible, the best colleges possible, do the most AP classes possible. And because while our school doesn't try and do this, it's kind of natural that with such a large population of Asian people and with that model minority myth that there's just so much competition and it can be really pressuring and hard on many Asian people.
Yeah. Simar.
Yeah, kind of like I think you mentioned a little bit too, is that like so like I'm from like Nevada, so we don't have like a huge South Asian population, but we have like a sizable one. And I was part of this like organization and it still is the only like service provider for South Asian individuals because and like you talked about is that there's like this almost like just kind of inherent belief that like oh like South Asian people are successful or like and like same I think just like with like even like Asian people in general, right? Is that like they are successful, they don't need help, they don't need kind of like the social services that maybe other groups do, and that really hurts the people that obviously like don't fall into that category, right? Who do need those social services.
Yeah, I agree. At my school, there's a couple of Asian kids with special needs, and everyone sees them in the hallway and they're like, they're Asian. Why do they need that? And like, obviously, that's not how it works. And that's just another good example of model minority myth. Okay, let me get water and then we'll go to the next slide. Okay, so before I talked about like what the actual point is, I wanted to talk about why it matters right now. So in the wake of COVID-19, ANHPI communities experienced a massive wave of hate crimes and a lot of racism. Like for instance, this is it, like not only is this a reason why the model minority myth doesn't protect us, it was like this all happened because the country needed a scapegoat for COVID-19, and we were reminded as we were still seen as perpetual foreigners. So dismantling the model minority myth, it's about demanding real data and resources and creating spaces for the full spectrum of AANHPI communities. So what the actual point is, these experiences are common and talking about them can bring a lot of awareness, but you know what's better than just speaking about it? You guessed it, legislation. So how can advocacy impact our lives? Does anyone want to share?
I can be the guinea pig again if you want.
Yeah, sure.
Can you repeat the question again?
It's on the slide, but it says, how can advocacy impact our lives?
Yeah, so obviously a lot of that I could talk Georgia specific, I guess. So for us, we're currently working on advocating for AP Asian American studies as well as like ethnic studies all across Georgia. So an example, African American studies was almost defunded by our superintendent earlier into the school year, and only through like a lot of pushback from various student advocates that I knew, teachers, school board members, school board people who had run for school board and didn't win, et cetera, who had pushed back against that ruling, and it got AP African American Studies the funding it needed, and it was reinstated in a lot of schools. So as an example, Gwinnett County, it's a county nearby. It's about an hour, 30 minutes away from Atlanta. That county just recently rolled out its Asian American Ethnic Studies elective. And obviously it was rolled out before Trump took office. So I'm not completely sure if that process is still occurring, but it took a lot of student testimonies and stuff at the school board to actually get that to happen. So all of those like are slightly related to like ethnic history and the ANHPI experience, I guess, and advocacy and legislation play a huge part.
Yeah, that's something that's also kind of happening in Texas as well. Would anyone else like to share?
Yeah, I can speak a little bit about this question. So, at least for me, like the way that advocacy is impacting my life is a little bit more towards the limitations and like the mobility of AANHPI Americans in their careers. So I live in a very STEM focused area, like as I'm sure a lot of you do. So when I was in my freshman year, I took a lot of computer science classes, a lot of like STEM focused classes, and I thought I wanted to major in data science. Because everyone around me, every like Chinese American, Korean American, South Asian American, they were studying things like computer science, computer engineering, electrical engineering in college, and I thought that was the only thing that I could do. But I started seeing more Asian Americans in my area, specifically my state representative. She's South Asian. Become involved in advocacy, and then I started to realize that that was a possibility for me. So I think the way that advocacy has impacted my life specifically is that I've seen that there are more paths possible for me, and I don't need to single myself out into certain fields or certain ideas or career paths because I don't believe that I can accurately fit the picture of what society has painted for me of what a successful advocate is or a successful public servant.
I think that like the people elected into office are really good role models for people who don't know like what they want to do in the future. So I think that like the legislation they enact and them just being in office is very powerful. It can impact a lot of lives. Ishan?
Yeah, so for me in North Carolina, here in Cabarrus County, just outside of Charlotte, it's a really red area. And so our state representative, his name is Brian Echeverria. he's he's a strong Republican, a staunch conservative, and he's been spearheading the effort in the North Carolina General Assembly to get rid of all DEI initiatives. And ignoring, the actual impact of what this means, the mere fact of him discussing DEI has been so detrimental to Asian Americans, especially who live here. And it's not only been detrimental to us because, other racial groups might be disparaging us for advocating, but on top of that, it's caused a divide within the ANHPI community here because, some people agree, some people don't. That's natural. But the fact is that the manner in which these discussions have been conducted are so polarizing that it's divided so many people, and we all live in the same state, we all have the same goals, but it's just very polarizing.
I agree. I think that like polarization specifically affects a lot, like legislation, and that impacts people a lot. Audit.
Yeah, so for me, I think that a lot of my advocacy has kind of come through the volunteering events that I go to. So obviously there is a lot of preparation that you have to do before that and everything. And while that part of the process can be fun, I think the most memorable and enjoyable process for me is like actually going out there and talking to people about the ideas that you have, the change that you want to see, and then just kind of getting to hear their opinions on it, whether whether they agree with you or not. And I would agree with Ishan on this part that I like always try and maintain some sort of respect when I'm talking to people, because when you don't have any respect for other people's opinions, that's kind of when everything kind of starts to crumble and nothing really starts to work anymore. So the most enjoyable part of advocacy and how it's impacted my life is just kind of getting to talk to other people in a civic, like calm setting, and we can just like discuss our opinions and learn more about them.
I think that's really powerful. Yeah. Okay. So why does legislation specifically matter? Um, there's societal desires and goals. It like kind of like legislation reflects what society wants. It also shapes visibility. And this kind of matters because the model minority myth thrives on invisibility. When our communities aren't counted, we aren't really seen. So legislation can help because of a couple of things. Data disaggregation laws, which we'll get into a little bit later, force institutions to collect and publish data by ethnic subgroups. And without legal mandates, policymakers continue to assume all AANHPIs are thriving and allocate resources accordingly. And then also legislation drives equity in education, health, and civil rights, equity and collective power, which is the third subpoint on this list. And that matters because a myth shouldn't really decide who gets access to healthcare, culturally competent education, or like language support as well. So legislation can help because education bills can challenge the achievement gap narrative and fund programs in under-resourced schools with high ANHPI populations, and civil rights protections specifically can address hate crimes, housing discrimination, and labor exploitation affecting AANHPI workers, especially immigrants and essential workers. And then legislation is also a tool for collective power because the model minority myth isolates us, and legislation can help us build coalitions and enact institutional change. So legislation helps because policy lets us move from a personal frustration, just being like, I'm angry, this makes me annoyed, to systemic reform through collective action and collective power. And we can also draft and pass bills, forcing elected officials to acknowledge and serve our voices. And this is especially powerful for youth activists whose voices aren't really heard as much. And this basically helps us work alongside other marginalized groups to fight the systems that pit us against each other. Okay, so we're not actually gonna do a SWOT analysis. I've already kind of done it on the slides, but we're gonna look at each of these legislations and kind of look at their strengths and weaknesses as well, and for some of them. Okay, so there's four major categories. First are data disaggregation laws. The aggregation of ANHPI data often marks disparities among different subgroups and homogenizes them, which reinforces the model minority myth by portraying the community as uniformly successful. For example, like they'll take the data of all ANHPI people, and if the trend is overall positive, it doesn't matter if like some specific subgroups were doing bad and one specific subgroup was doing really well. So for example, to counter this, several states have enacted laws requiring the disaggregation of data to better understand and serve diverse populations. For example, in California, in 2016, they passed a bill mandating the Department of Health to collect and report data on AANHPI subgroups separately. But this requirement didn't really extend to education, housing, or employment, which means that it didn't really solve the problems. And then in New York and Massachusetts, these states have implemented more comprehensive measures than the California one, which required all state agencies to disaggregate ANHPA data across various sectors, including education and health. There's also some important case studies that we're going to cover. So Lau versus Nichols, which is about the San Francisco United School District. And same thing for Ho versus San Francisco United School District. And then finally, the Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard, the 2023 case that we all definitely know a lot about. Then we're going to talk about curriculum reform and ethnic studies initiatives. So this matters because the Mall minority myth is perpetuated not just through policy, but through what specifically is taught and what is left out of our classrooms. So most students never really learn about AANHPI history, struggles, or political activism, which reinforces the narrative of Asians as apolitical and outsiders who don't really have problems. So there's a couple of key developments that we're going to cover. Like we're going to focus on them kind of as case studies for all of these. So California's ethnic studies requirement of 2021 and Illinois' Teach Act of 2021. And you might be wondering why all of these are in 2021, like why that specific year. A lot of these are around that time. And it's because Asian American hate crimes and stuff like that was really spiking at this time because of COVID and a lot of Americans finding a scapegoat for COVID in Asian Americans. And then the last category is anti-hate crime and civil rights legislation. So this matters because the surge in hate during COVID-19 exposed how fragile the modern minority status is. So like despite being framed as successful, we were still targeted and treated as outsiders and often denied a lot of legal protections or recourse when targeted. So the two main pieces of legislation we're going to talk about is the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act and the Jabara Hire No Hate Act, and both are from 2021. Okay, so we have 7 case studies. Okay, how do I go back? Okay, what is going on? Okay, the first case study is Lau versus Nichols. I'm not gonna like read everything on this slide because that's a lot, and I know you guys can read yourselves. So I'm just gonna read the overview and then talk about the takeaways and results. So this was a SCOTUS ruling where Chinese students in San Francisco weren't provided enough English instruction. They sued, and the court ruled that this violated the Civil Rights Act and mandated English language instruction for Chinese American students, aka like ESL. So as a result, a lot of students and a lot of students like 1,800 plus got access to ESL services, and this was more widespread because other states started implementing it after seeing the success, and now 90% have federally mandated ESL programs from this case. So a couple of key takeaways. First, the myth of AANHPI self-sufficiency hides the need for structural support. And the second key takeaway was that one lawsuit from AANHPI students had a massive impact on national education equity policy, which not only like shows the impact of legislation, but also shows the impact of like what young AANHPI people can do. Yeah. So the second one is Ho versus San Francisco United School District in, what date does it say? I can't see it. In 1998. And so both of these cases were against San Francisco United School District. So this one specifically is where Chinese American families sued them for setting quotas that limited their child's access to elite schools, and were saying that like you're overrepresented. So they argue that this penalized academic performance based on race, and they were saying that like, yes, you're doing really good and you deserve to be here, but there's too many of you here, so you can't. So this kind of represents the small minority myth and how it justifies exclusion. So results wise, 40% of Chinese American students denied access before were admitted after quotas ended. And a lot of new students were affected by the new admission system, and other school districts are reviewing or revising their quota systems as well. In the chat. Oh, okay, there's a question. I'll answer it after. Okay, yeah, so first the key takeaways. The myth of AANHPI self-sufficiency hides the need for structural support. And one lawsuit from AANHPI students had a massive impact on national education equity policy. So there's a question in the chat, which it's a direct message, so I'll just read it out loud. So the question is, why do 10% of public school districts not have these programs when there's a SCOTUS ruling? And the reason is that these are federally mandated ESL programs that are in the school districts, but I guess like some of them is like kind of like it's a question of federalism, because just because this is a federal case, they were ruling specifically about San Francisco. So I think that other states weren't specifically mandated to, it was just like recommended. So these ESL programs are stemming from this case. And I also think that like the other 10% might have had it before, so they wouldn't be stemming from this case. Okay. Okay. And then the last one is Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard, which was the 2023 case. So in this case, they were saying that like Harvard was like setting quotas, and the landmark is also very well known. This case is well known for dismantling affirmative action. So after this ruling, they decided that race-based admissions are not constitutional. And so college banned race-conscious admissions before were 3,000, like after like so before there were 3,000 colleges that had race conscious admissions, and then after it was banned, 43% of AANHPI youth surveyed felt weaponized in this case, and there was a 0.3% increase in AANHPI enrollment at Harvard, even though like they claimed that the ruling would help their chances. It didn't really help that much. So there are a couple of key takeaways. First, we're not really being protected, rather we were just being used in this case. And Asian Americans were kind of like 43%, as per a survey, said that they felt weaponized and kind of like used in this case to kind of like put down other minorities. And the second key takeaway is that the split in the affirmative action rulings and the myth of race-based rulings divides us from other Black, Indigenous, people of color communities and weakens coalitions because, as a lot of people know, affirmative action helped a lot of BIPOC communities and hurt Asians and white people. So this is just another instance of us kind of being grouped with white people in the like Asian American versus like Black people's racial struggle for like rights and involvement into these kinds of things, like Jenny talked about. Okay, the next case study is California's ethnic studies requirement from 2021. So in this, California was the first state to require ethnic studies, which included AANHPI history for high school graduation. So years of youth and educator organizing was pushing for a more inclusive curriculum, and this challenges myths like the apolitical and successful Asian by increasing awareness and education. So there were a lot of really positive results. 70 plus districts launched AANHPI support and ethnic study pilots. So there are a couple of key takeaways. First, education breaks myths before they take root by dismantling biases and assumptions based on stereotypes. And the second key takeaway is that the stories of our communities is about survival, resistance, and a lot more than just success. Okay, let me turn the fan on. Sorry, my computer's like overheating. Okay, the next case study is in Illinois' Teach Act. So this was the first U.S. law that required the inclusion of Asian American history in all K-12 schools. So think back to like when you were learning about World War II, you would learn about the Japanese internment camps and stuff like that. So this was passed in response to COVID era hate and ensures that students are learning AAPI history and American history and not as separate. So dismantles the notion of immigrant exceptionalism. And a lot of similar legislation was passed in 4 other states within a year. And every single Illinois public school teacher was required to receive AANHPI history training. And there's a massive impact on students in Illinois. So a couple of key takeaways. First, if we aren't in the curriculum, we're left out of the national narrative. And 2, the myth disappears when young people know about our real history because education often like shapes what people believe. And so if people are learning the truth, then they won't be as persuaded by like misguided like beliefs or propaganda. Okay, cool. I think this is one of the last ones. The COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act of 2021. Asian American violence surged during COVID. I kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, and this act strengthened reporting, prosecution, and awareness efforts. So this federal law responding to rise in anti-AHPI hate, debunking the myth that AHPI people are not affected by racism. So a couple of important results are highlighted and 2 key takeaways. First, the myth is that we're safe, but this law and the statistics prove that we weren't. One of the important results that I want to highlight here is that there's a 238% increase in reported API hate crimes before this act. And the second key takeaway is that visibility creates legal responses while silence allows for harm to continue. Okay, this is the last one. The Jabaya Hayer No Hate Act of 2021. This was named after 2 victims of hate crimes, and this law argued that most hate crimes are underrepresented and especially in AAPI and immigrant communities. So there's bipartisan hate crime data, response, and support for all of the people impacted in all the communities, including AAPI communities. It also like a couple important results. 12% of hate crimes were reported at FBI before this law. Like, I remember I think that Andy Kim was saying this yesterday that a lot of people won't report it when hate crimes happen, specifically API communities because they think that it doesn't really matter. But the only way that legislation happens is when they know that there's a problem. So reporting is really important. There's two key takeaways. First, the myth blinds the system to our pain, while the data proves that we're targets too. So there's kind of like a dissonance right there. And two is that solidarity legislation protects all of us and we must demand inclusion. No one is going to like give it to you willingly. You have to demand it. Okay, now you're a policymaker and it's time to draft a bill. There's a sample right on the right. And so we basically like the instructions for this, that we've seen the consequences of the model minority myth. And we've isolated a lot of the consequences in these slides. Misleading education policies, invisibility and hate crime prevention, and like not really feeling equal. And so the new law that you're going to draft today can either target one root cause of this myth to be effective or multiple to be more broad. I think that the more effective, like there's obviously like big like umbrella laws, like for example, the big bill that Trump is trying to pass, which is not a good idea for multiple reasons, but also because it's very broad. A lot of times you would want a more narrow bill because that's how you get more people to agree because it's only one thing that you're arguing about and they can't find like something else to fight about. Like for example, the Venn diagram of people who will like the one policy and the Venn diagram of people that will like two separate policies is relatively small, or it's not the exact same as the Venn diagram of people that would like one policy. So it's better for the law to target one root cause, but if you guys want to target multiple, there's a bunch of reasons for that. There's like political back scratching where you want to pass a bill and you'll incorporate some part of someone else's bill so that it passes together. A bunch of reasons like that. But I think that for today, you can, if unless you like really want to do multiple causes, I think one root cause can be affected. So the steps for this is first you have to isolate the problems and goals, then find the solutions, then think about the funding, and then you have to write it all down in legally precise words and then put it into the chat that you're done, and then we'll take turns sharing. So there's a sample, like an outline on the side. I got that from Google. I don't know how effective, how like, it looks pretty accurate to me. So just use that template and write a bill. You can get into partners if you guys want.
Do you want to instead maybe have people share what bill ideas they might want to have? I feel like we have to end in like 3 or so minutes and
Oh, yeah, wait, actually, yeah, we can verbalize it because I didn't realize I was too late. I was going late.
yeah, no
Yeah.
worries. Oh my gosh, you're so good. I can talk about the kind of bill I'm interested in. It's not specifically AANHPI related, but I did think it'd be really interesting to have more student representation on school boards. I've looked into like the Georgia Code specifically, and it's definitely really interesting in terms of the fact that it doesn't specifically outlaw student representation, but it doesn't make provisions for it or require that there is student representation on school boards, which is something I'm definitely going to look into if I ever decide to pitch it to my local Republican lawmaker, because fortunately or unfortunately for us, he's the secretary of the education committee at Georgia. So we'll see. But yeah,
Okay.
Jinya, if you want to pass it off, I guess, because you said you'll
Anya,
say
is that
something.
cheese?
No, it's a
Oh,
biscotti.
I thought it was cheese and I got really excited. Um, so mine isn't really a bill. So I want to preface this by saying I'm from Illinois, so I do have like that bill in play where it mandates Asian American education be like a like history and whatever be a part of curricula and cultural like competency training for our teachers. And while I do agree that our teachers are a lot more culturally competent than a lot of the other like teachers that I've had like in primary school or in secondary school, so I am seeing that impact. Um, a lot of schools in Illinois are competitive, so they go based off of AP standards. So basically, a lot of students are taking like AP US History, AP US Government, and that doesn't really leave a lot of room for a specific elective class. Or since our teachers teach based off of College Board standards, that doesn't leave a lot of room for them to incorporate new material in specifically about the AANHP identity. So instead, I would direct College Board to themselves be more competent when they are writing AP US history material to mandate that they include a lot more than just the Japanese internment camps, which are very glossed over in AP US history curricula, because not only would that solve the issue of sort of a lack of a lack of inclusion of specific and detailed information and like the dissemination of history within coursework, but that would make it a lot easier for students around the nation and not just STEM states to be able to have that be part of their curriculum. So it's not really like a legislation, but I would like a piece of legislation, but I would just, like advocate for College Board to have that be a part of their standards.
Uh, okay, so I guess I'll go next. I think that this is again not exactly AANHPI related. But for me, I think I'd like to see better education programs for juveniles and those who are in like under 18 prisons. Because I think a lot of areas, like while it is required that those students receive education, they don't receive the best quality education that they possibly could. And I think that Illinois already has a pretty decent solution to this. I think they made a bill that like makes like its own unique district for juveniles to get like quality education and targeted education. And I think I'd like to see that implemented in more places so that we can give those people more chances to actually reintegrate themselves into the world and just like have all the opportunities that everyone else does.
I think that's really interesting. Yeah. I liked all the bills that we presented. I think that we're running out of time and Ankita might snipe me. So let's look at the impact of legislation and advocacy. So there's 6 main impacts that I wanted to highlight. First is visibility. When we're accounted for, we're served properly. When we make our voice heard, it's accounted for. Data disaggregation laws specifically relate to this, and I've made the more invisible ANHPI subgroups statistically visible, which we talked about before, and that resulted in targeted services, funding, attention, and policymaking. Second, we challenge stereotypes. So ethnic studies and curriculum reform debunk the model minority myth and shows that ANHPI history includes protest, resistance, and solidarity. Advocacy gets our history into classrooms in some instances, and that helps support youth so that they don't feel inferior, which Andy Kim was talking about a lot yesterday. So I thought it was interesting, and I wanted to put this in. Third is legal protections. So, oh no. Wait, I have to edit this or it's gonna mess with me. Okay. Laws improve reporting and oversight, which challenges the myth that AHPI people don't need any support, which was specifically shown through the Hate Crimes Act of 2021, the COVID-19 one, and it acknowledges that we're not immune to racism, but rather targets of it. Next is youth empowerment. So young organizers are writing bills, kind of like what we did today, but like taking them out into the real world, testifying and winning. For instance, the Teach Act in Illinois was led by students. Young campaigners can push specific acts, etc. Community coalition building. So advocacy led by AHPI students and communities can build solidarity with BIPOC communities, like what Junya was saying about Stop Asian Hate and Black Lives Matter. Wins can become shared, and accountability efforts can benefit everyone. And the last thing I want to say is that narrative shift through legislation can shape public perception. So when laws recognize our needs and pain, they redefine what it means to be AHPI in America. And that's my contact information and the credits for the slides. Yeah, if anyone has any questions, I think we're out of time. So unless you want me to like use up the last 2 minutes and keep it.
No, that was great. Does anyone
Okay.
actually do have any questions though? Anya did great. Okay. If not, thank you so much for showing up to our first session. We're super excited that that Anya shared this with us. It's honestly very cool. The case studies are really cool. I haven't heard of half these cases. They better go over them in AP Gov. If they don't, I'm crashing out.
They're
But
not in AP Gov, I think. I don't think any of them are in AP Gov actually.
oh, that's kind of sad.
No, they aren't.
Yeah.
Wait, actually, Anya, if you could forward this slideshow to Ankita or I, and then we could give it to our socials team so they could make posts based off of the cases, that would be perfect.
Yeah, I'll do
Uh,
that.
Yeah, you can share it with us. That'd be perfect. Let me
Just the
stop.
email.
Yeah, that email that I sent you. Perfect. But yeah, let me stop the recording here and then restart it so then it saves that one as yours specifically. So then Zed doesn't have to cut every single one up. Hi Zed, because now you're gonna be editing it. Anyways, let me see, where can I turn it off? Okay. Yes. Okay. Where? Why? Stop recording.